It's not a product. It's not a thing that you do from time to time. It's a process. It's a way of thinking about the world, about being curious, about turning anything into learning.
Hi, I'm Sylvie Milverton, CEO of Links Educate. This is Talent is Everywhere. We're here to talk about how to keep talent and how to develop talent in order to build a strong business. We'll interview leaders to hear their best experiences of how they invested in people. So today we have a special episode of the podcast. We're going to be talking with two people coming out of an event that we had last week called Shape the Future Consortium with a lot of learning leaders from around the world. So we have Nigel Paine, who is the co-founder of the consortium, along with Kimo Kippen. And he's had a long career in learning, organizational development. He's an author, broadcaster, podcaster. And also Martin Couzins, who works together with Nigel. He's the founder of the From Scratch podcast around many of these HR and learning issues. And he's the CEO and principal of Insights Media. Welcome to both.
Thank you. Thank you, Sylvie. It's lovely to see you.
Great to be here.
Yeah, and it was great. We all, we're in these sort of same circles and we all know a lot of the same people. So it was just such a pleasure last week at the end of January to all be together at INSEAD and have the chance, to bring a small group of learning leaders together and talk about, what's on our mind. And there were lots of interesting themes that came together. And as we were prepping for this, thinking about, what is sort of like the arc of the conversation to pull it all together. And this theme that came back a lot was, learning is the answer to everything, or is learning the answer to everything? Like, how are organizations moving themselves forward? So maybe, Martin, I'll let you kind of get us started with how would you frame the discussion that came out of our meeting?
I think before we came on air, we were talking about the fact, and thanks, Sylvie, but for asking me to step up to the mic first. Before we came on air, I was talking about the fact that there was that forum was full of great people, really senior people for big organizations all around the world. And we covered a lot of content. We heard from a new generation of leaders starting in the workplace. We heard about the economic challenges facing all organizations and climate challenges. We looked at skills and we looked at learning and leadership. And, I was thinking, what could we talk about in 20 minutes? There's always that kind of idea of how you can distill all that into something that makes a lot of sense in a short space of time. And for me, as an observer, I just thought actually what came through strongly was that learning is seen as you said in an intro, the answer to some of these intractable problems that we have. These are really big, knotty, strategic issues that affect the planet and organizations and communities and individuals. And I thought there's a strong sense of that actually learning is the key that can help us kind of learn our way out of these problems, to innovate, to do things differently, to be adaptable and resilient. And then I thought, so this is how I would frame it. I was thinking, well, if we know this, and I think we potentially have known this for a long time, why is it not at these kind of strategic importance that it should be in organizations? Now, you may turn around and say, that's not true, but I don't know that is the case. And so that for me seems like a really important part of all of this debate. Is the elephant in the room is that people running businesses, I don't think, are taking this seriously enough. But actually, it is about learning. It is about helping people and teams and organizations change the way they behave and how they face into these massive challenges that are on our doorstep right now. So I think that seemed to me like a really powerful outcome for me, just observing it. And I think it was reflected in some of the actions that the delegates took away. I think there was one of them was about, I've just got my list here, learning as the new currency, as a kind of idea, currency for change, I think. So So that's how I kind of frame it all.
Right. And what about you, Nigel? How would you, and you have been in sort of have organized and been in many events like this, maybe, yeah, what did you feel was, different coming out of this discussion, in this like beginning 2025?
When we started pulling it together, the big issue for us was to try and get the participants' eyes raised above the horizon. So many of the people that were there were just working long hours, just doing stuff to survive. And it's all very much kind of tactical, routine, pretty much stuff with little room for vision and little room to pause and think big. And this was an attempt to pause and think big. And that's where the kind of magic solution arose. But if leaders thought of themselves as learning leaders, then you would change the nature of organizations, because their job will be to encourage learning broadly across the organization and pick up and deal with the solutions that emerge. The problem is that is learning the answer only if it changes things, only if the behavior that is changed impacts the organization and not just the individual. And what we found was that these massive bureaucratic cultural barriers to making learning the answer, and it's kind of pushed aside. It's something interesting, useful in terms of skills development, but that creative thinking about the world and thinking about your organization and its place in the world gets pushed away by the day to day. So that was the essence. Is learning the answer? Well, possibly, but not necessarily if you've got an organization that doesn't allow the answers to emerge. It just becomes a kind of interesting process. So that was my take.
Right. And I think, what was interesting was the way you brought together like a lot of different perspectives. Like we started out with some young students from INSEAD, and then we had, so we're really like they're about to enter into the world of work. And then we invited, a professors thinking about big ideas on sustainability and climate change, and what is the how can learning, what is our role of learning leaders in terms of like tackling these really big scary topics around climate change and sustainability, and then we had the professor talking about the maison and this idea of how do organizations create this idea of a home. And if I can, I'll let you, Nigel, add to this. But to sum up this idea of an organization being a home, where on the one hand, you have a safety and a stability, but that, and also that you're always developing. Like, what do we think about when we think about being home? It's that you're safe to develop. And it's this constant, maybe tension between needing freedom and wanting to explore and run, and wanting the comfort and the sort of, context and safety, I suppose, safety to really develop ourselves. I think that was a pretty powerful message. It gets back to your idea of like, how do organizations actually make learning work? What do you think?
Yes, the concept of maison is very much a French concept. The idea that something is not a store or an office or a place. It's actually somewhere where you belong and has coherent values and structures, and you go in the door metaphorically and literally, and you absorb some of that when you do your work, when you behave in particular ways. And I think that idea that as a leader, you're not just driving forward on profits, you're actually creating a place that people want to come. You're creating a kind of destination, a place where people can think, can reflect, and can solve problems. And those problems, big problems, can be tackled. So I thought that was very interesting, that idea that it's really important to be comfortable and safe in order for ideas to flow. And in some ways, in order for the behavior change of learning to have some sort of impact in the organization as a whole. And how many leaders would A, see themselves as encouraging the learning of others, and B, see the place that they work in as some kind of maison? We've almost done everything we possibly can to make it the opposite of a maison, more like a prison, or more like just a neutral, cold, antiseptic space where you feel you're part of for a little bit, but you're obviously going to move on soon. So there's not much point in investing much into that location. So yes, that that element of emotional bonding, of feeling great as well as being great, was very much prevalent, and it came into big issues like sustainability. When you're talking about sustainability, it's not just let's look at the process that I control and try and make it a little bit more sustainable. It's actually looking at the impact of the whole organization in the world and the impact of the organization and its community. So it's looking much, much bigger and trying to tackle big issues and make people feel that their contribution matters in that area. And when we talk to the young people, that's one of the things. It's not just, that would be kind of interesting, perhaps. This is fundamental to the way we see the world. We want to make a big contribution. We want to have some kind of care and attention paid to us and to everyone else in the organization. And we want to feel safe in order to be creative. But their view of whether they would get that was much more ambiguous. That's what they want, but whether they'll get it delivered on from their limited experience, the answer is probably, well, on balance, probably not. So, we're on a kind of journey, and this session was just the opening of the door at the beginning of the journey. We haven't even stepped out yet, I thought.
And do you think that things, every company, if you look on their careers page or if you listen to, CEOs, let's say most companies are saying the people are at the center of what we do, and we encourage development, we encourage learning. And so a lot of these ideas, maybe are old in a sense. But do we see, what has changed? What do you see change? Do you think that in terms of AI or in terms of sustainability or all these different ideas, do you feel like we're at some kind of shift in the way companies are responding or meaning something different behind those words if people are at the center of what we do?
Yeah, because I thought there's an interesting, and I'm going to say his name wrong, it slightly concerns me, Gian Piero Petriglieri, right? He's an INSEAD professor, sorry for my pronunciation there. There was one point which I think relates to this, which is the idea of talent as a proxy for mobility in organizations. And he was talking about the fact that we come from this place where people used to want workers to stay with the organization for a long time. That was kind of how things worked, basically. A lot more paternalistic, potentially. Not all organizations, but I think that's where people used to have longer tenure in organizations. And he was talking about the idea of talent now, and you're talking about psychological, functional, and geographic mobility. And I think we have to be careful what we wish for, because we're doing this with skills. We're breaking everything down to a granular, atomic level. So you've got individuals and individual skills, and you're going to push people around the organization based on that. And we say this is a good thing. But if we then say we've got intractable issues that are linked to community and the planet, then actually, if you've got organizations that it can be really hard in organizations to have purpose and meaning if people are coming and going all the time. And if the leadership is coming and going all the time, and if the leadership doesn't behave itself and comes and goes because of those behaviors, right? And then you've got this whirlwind of talent just moving around, coming and going to the next place. None of that is necessarily anchoring people in something linked to community, let alone the planet. I mean, that's my perspective on it. So I think we've got this tension here where, things are changing. AI is definitely helping disintermediate community in businesses, I think. It's going very personalized. It's something that Nigel talks about. So it's all very atomic, and we can use AI to come in at that level and take and automate things. But how do we then bridge that with the idea of purpose, meaning, community, and bigger issues like the climate? There are big shifts, but I don't know that some of the shifts in technology are helping us answer the issues, some of the bigger issues, although I think they can do. I don't know. What do you think, Nigel?
I think they can do too, Martin. I actually think it's not such an insoluble problem. If you want to solve it, you can. For example, if people had mentors or advisors or whatever they might be who stayed with them in their career in an organization. You can move around no problem at all because you've got an anchor back. And if you build a community of people who work in different parts of the organization but have got similar issues or challenges or asking similar questions to you, that community is portable. And there's nothing better than being in an organization where you belong everywhere. And it's much better than being in a place where you don't want to leave this small group because they're the only ones you've ever met who you like, and that you want to stay there because without that group around you, chaos will ensue. So I think it's just thinking bigger about how you manage people in a much more fluid, brittle world where you need to have to keep moving in order to stay on top and stay in touch. Because there's nothing worse than being in a nice, stable group, which gradually makes itself redundant because it's not moving and developing. So that if you focus on how you create comfort and support and stability in people who are unstable, moving around, tackling different things, moving from here and there, but they've got that umbilical cord that links them back to something solid, which is all around purpose and values. And that you've got somebody, that I go back to Sylvie because Sylvie tells me and reinforces for me the importance of those connections. So wherever I go, I know that Sylvie's just an email or a phone call or even a visit away. So I think it can be done, but it's a radical restructuring of what an organization looks like. At the moment, they're in these hierarchical bubbles where you daren't move outside the hierarchy. You can't talk to people above because you haven't got permission. You don't talk to people below because who cares about them anyway? And you end up with this isolation and fragmentation, and no one tries to build the lateral connection. So that's why I'm kind of slightly obsessed with communities of practice at the moment, because they're the one thing that definitely works in connecting people laterally across an organization. So an organization knows a little bit more what it knows and feels much more like a series of connected islands, which have got very strong transport links between them, and not islands where you repel all borders. So it's doable, but it takes a mindset change, and it takes a leadership reimagination, really, to deliver. But maybe naively, I just think it's essential. I just think this stuff is going to come, because without it, organizations are just going to crash and burn, because they're just going to isolate themselves from the reality. And we know that the world changes too fast to isolate any aspect or any part of an organization from the real world and from the real conditions in which it operates.
Mm-hmm. And that makes me think also just a lot about learning. And Martin, what you were saying before, just about these skill matrices, and that sort of, it's so easy to be a bit reductive. But if you think like, okay, people want to grow, organizations need to be connected. I love this idea of community of practice, like open learning up, like let people choose things and think like more broadly. Like we talked in the meeting a lot, often it came up, this idea of like the human part of AI, how to make the future of work, better for people. And it was a sense of like, okay, to do my job, I need this specific skill. Now I'm like a, new CEO of a startup, and I've had to learn, all type of things that I didn't know before, but I also just need like just more broad skills that I'm maybe not using today. And you just think how many of us who are in the frontline, or who are, a junior person in HR or a junior finance person, you could learn a new language, you could learn project management, you could learn negotiation skills. Maybe you're passionate about data science, or maybe now you want to learn how to code AI. You just think like, if we can think more broadly about, how can learning facilitate this sort of, communities, and to give people, more broad skills, as opposed to thinking like, okay, I'm in finance, so I need to know these things, and I'm a leader, so I need to know how to have difficult conversations, and I'm, in international, so I have to learn Spanish. So I think there's a sense that companies can be more, I don't know, just think more broadly or more relaxed maybe about what does learning mean to help people grow.
Yeah, and also to make you think that learning is bigger. It's not a product. It's not a thing that you do from time to time. It's a process. It's a way of thinking about the world, about being curious, about turning anything into learning and building learning into the flow of work. So it's not something separate from all the things that you do in the workplace. So I completely get it. I agree with you entirely. that it's really important to rethink all of this in order to deliver organizations that are comfortable in the real world and will survive in the real world. Because that's what I suppose that's the thing that really worries me, is that organizations will not survive and they will just crash and burn. And then it will be much worse for everybody if organizations just can't make that transition that we've just been talking about. So it's getting ready for the transition, in a sense, getting ready for this world, which we know we're at the cusp of at the moment. Right at the cusp.
I agree with you, Sylvia. I think it's a really interesting point, because I think the reality is, my reality, I'm sure lots of people's reality, is that you go, if you're someone that's kind of open to ideas and thinking, and you just go into work and you reflect back that you heard something that you thought was quite interesting, it's completely unrelated to your function or your industry, but actually there's something in it that's just interesting, because it might inform the way you think about something. It can be so easily just pushed to one side. People just think, what are you talking about? We're here to do this thing. And I think my experience in organizations has been, actually, some of the ideas are reserved for people that are more senior. It's almost like that's where the thinking happens, which I think is just unbelievably short-sighted, because it's happening everywhere. To Nigel's point, I think, as well, about your work, around this, is actually these ideas come from everywhere. It's the ability to actually be able to share them, and I love the word here, entertain, to entertain an idea, just to be able to have that conversation in the team or with your manager or some colleagues. Oh, God, I saw that thing over there. It's just, just imagine if we did that. Could we do that? Can you have that conversation without someone kind of knocking it back, saying, we haven't got time to discuss that sort of stuff? You really need that. It needs to be happening a lot. And then you need to know what to do with it and where that goes. And that's what I just think that is missing in a lot of organizations a lot of the time.
Yeah, and good idea. There's so many, I've had some, young interns and, younger employees, and some of the best things of my startup are from the, it's just, you're blown away at the creativity and intelligence of, someone in their early 20s. It's still, was I that good in my early 20s? I don't know.
Of course you were, Sylvie. But you don't have to tell them to learn. You don't have to say, now, learning is very important. They know that because that's what they're doing. They're just sucking it in order to be able to be more competent and survive in this world. They get that. But it's how you bottle that essence of that enthusiasm and turn it into something enduring in an organization. That's much more challenging. But you're absolutely right. I always spend some time with people under 30. Always. I try and do that every week. If I can't, I certainly do it every month, because not only are they the future of work, but they make me happy. They've got so many ideas. They're so enthusiastic, and they're optimistic, and it's going to be a tough world for them by the time they're 70 and they're just about leaving the workforce. They'll have gone through an awful lot, and the world will have gone through an awful lot. But they see it, and they will take it on with enthusiasm. But for them to say, let's debate about whether learning is important, they get that, 100% get that. Because they can see the speed of everything, the shift, the velocity of everything is so amazing now. They need to learn, and they recognize that.
And they're relying on their, employers to, fill some of that gap. Yeah, which is why it was just so, special. The 2 days we spent together with everyone, just being together. I mean, some of my takeaways, of course, were, the intellectual part of what we spoke about, but really the other part was just, being in person and just the human, just talking and being together and sharing dinner and, making, new friends and being able to have these sort of spontaneous conversations. It was super special. And I was so glad to be a part of it and that you invited me. And so maybe to wrap up, you can tell us a little bit, Nigel, about your new book, The Great Reset, which is, I think, in line with a lot of these different things that we're speaking about.
It is. It emerges out of my thinking over the last 10 years. And I think if I look at my books, then they've got bigger, wider and wider, not necessarily bigger and bigger, they're pretty much the same size. But what it means is that I focused in the first book very much on what you do as a learning leader in an organization. This is the process to be a learning leader. And I end up in this book saying, hey, no, you've got to change the whole organization. That's why it's called the Great Reset. That if you really want the organization to learn, you have to rethink some pretty much fundamentals about the way the organization develops itself. So I've built the book around, a number of values and a number of structural changes that you have to make. And I've interleaved it with case studies of successful organizations and ones that are not so successful, and tried to show that the success of the ones that I've highlighted is within everyone's grasp. There are just some simple principles that you've got to get, and the book tries to make that pretty clear. And if people want a copy, then my little plug at the end, to get a discount as well, then you just need to go straight to the site that is distributing the book. So if you go to store, as in bookstore, store.bookbaby.com/the-great-reset. So that's the URL, store.bookbaby.com/book/the-great-reset. And when you check out, use the code LDAP, capital letters 10, and you'll get 10% off the print book and 50% off the ebook. So that's a pretty good deal. Catch it while you can. These things switch on and switch off. So I'd love people to read it, but I'd also love them to send me comments. I really like to hear what people have made of it and what they've taken from it, and if they're doing anything as a result of it. Because at the end of the day, what matters to me most is that people are doing stuff, not just reading it and saying, well, it's interesting theoretically. I want them to say, that has helped me develop my organization, helped me rethink my purpose, rethink the way this organization operates. That's my fundamental aim.
Amazing. I guess there were a few things. Well, one of the things I love most is a practical case study about an HR implementation. So I am going to read your book, and then maybe we'll even have you back to talk about that, because that's one of my favorite podcast topics, is like a successful and unsuccessful case study.
Oh, I've got a perfect one of those. I've got two companies, which Company A and Company B, which I compare. One spectacularly successful, the other disastrously unsuccessful. And it's not because of human talent, it's not because of aspiration, it's to do with process and attitude of leadership and empowerment and autonomy and people's actions. So yeah, I'd love to talk to you about that.
Amazing. Well, I'm looking forward to read it, and we will link to that URL in the show notes. And this has been, a great conversation, and I have to say I was just super inspired by the meeting. And as I grow my own company, I'm really taking to heart a lot of the lessons we had around the idea of maison and, learning at the center of what we do. And, just an honor to be part of this community and get to know both of you. So thanks so much for the chat.
Thank you, Sylvie. And I hope to visit your maison one day and see what a great job you've done building a successful company.
Welcome anytime.
Thanks, Sylvie. It's been great to be here, so thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Talent is Everywhere. Make sure to subscribe if you like what you heard, and give us a follow on LinkedIn to continue the conversation on all things career mobility and talent development. Is there a topic you'd love for us to cover in a future episode, or a guest you'd recommend? Drop us an email at hello@linkseducate.com. And if you're looking for support on your talent development strategy, head over to linkseducate.com to learn more about our career mobility solution. That's LYNXeducate.com.